Okay, everyone, welcome to the fifth and final video. So in the previous videos, we talked about the Homo heidelbergensis morphology, behavior, and archaeology. And we're going to finish by focusing on one particular species, Homo naledi. So definitely not Homo heidelbergensis. Okay, so here is Homo naledi in a nutshell, I suppose. So this is the discoverer and lead researcher of that team, Lee Berger. Here is one of the skeletons, and here is an artist's recreation of said skeleton. So this is a really interesting find and is surprising in so many ways and is unique in so many ways, as you'll see. Okay, so Homo naledi was found in the Rising Star cave system. So here is South Africa. You can see zoomed in here. This is the Rising Star Cave in the Gauteng province, and it's only a mile away from the other famous South African sites, Sterkfontein, where Australopithecus africanus was found, and Sorkrans and Kromdraai, where Paranthropus robustus was found. Okay, so this entire discovery and excavation, analysis, publication, all of it started with a 2013 social media post. And it said, part of it said, they were looking for these researchers who must be skinny and preferably small. They must not be claustrophobic. They must be fit. They should have some caving experience. Climbing experience is a bonus. So I distinctly remember seeing this as a grad student in 2013. And my fellow grad students and I, when we saw this, we were just like, what the heck is going on? Well, this is what was going on. So these are the six researchers who answered that social media call and got selected. They're also known as the underground astronauts. And these two were the ones who originally discovered the cave chamber in which Homo naledi was found. So why did that social media call ask for basically very small and skinny people? Well, it's because this chamber, kind of very similar to Cima de los Huesos, but even more so, is quite a pain to get into. So this is, again, a plan view of that cave system. So you're looking at it from a bird's eye view. Here is the naledi chamber, also known as Chamber of Stars in the local language. So that's how it got its name. And this is a cross section. And so you see you have to go down, right, fit through some small spaces. And I have a better picture on the next slide. Okay, here. So here's a human for scale. So you basically have to descend down the entrance shaft, go all the way down, squeeze into what's known as a Superman's crawl, which is less than 10 inches high, right? A human for scale again. You have to climb over something called a dragon's back, squeeze again, squeeze down, and then finally you get to the naledi chamber, which is where all the hominin fossils are found. So this Superman's crawl, why is it called the Superman's crawl? Well, it's because to get through it, you actually have to have one arm in front of you, basically like your Superman. So you have to fit through some really tiny spots to get to that naledi chamber where the hominin fossils are found. So hence the social media call about someone with caving experience and someone who's very small and skinny and not claustrophobic. So yeah, this is crazy. And once you get to the naledi chamber, right, it's just like any other excavation. You do it slowly, you document everything, you carefully collect the specimens. And again, these cave systems logistically can be a nightmare because you have to drag all of the equipment with you through that 10-inch gap, right, to facilitate excavation and fossil collection. Here is another view inside the chamber. So you can see they rigged up lights. They brought computers, not only to collect data, but also to communicate with the project leaders on the surface who are too big to fit into and get to this naledi chamber. So pretty cool project. You can see that it was funded and documented by National Geographic. So this was a great way to communicate paleoanthropology and science to the public. And you could see why, because it's such a caving adventure. It's so unique. It's basically, yeah, a fun story to sell. And this is what was recovered in the naledi chamber. So large number of hominin fossils, including this one skeleton. Okay, this is where I would ask you to go see the video so you could X out of here, and I embedded the YouTube video right below this one. So you can see Lee talk about the Homo naledi discovery, what it means for human evolution, and also there are some videos of those really tight spots and some of the cavers actually squeezing through them. So it's pretty insane. So what was recovered in the naledi chamber? Well, 1,550 hominin fossils, so a crazy amount of fossils, right? Just like Cima de los Huesos, but of course not as much. And these 1,500 fossils belong to at least 15 individuals of various ages and both sexes. So just like the Cima de los Huesos specimens, you can kind of get an idea of the population, what they look like, the morphological variation, age structure, sex structure, etc. Okay, so after these fossils were recovered by the underground astronauts, Lee then put out another call, and this call was targeting young researchers to study the material. So here's a picture of that. And so that is how Homo naledi was discovered, recovered, and studied, and published. And so this is the most famous specimen, or the one they chose to kind of be the poster child of Homo naledi. They called it, I believe it's pronounced Neo. And what we see in Homo naledi and Neo is that we see a mix of primitive and derived traits. So the skull is very similar to Homo erectus, right? There's a sagittal keel, a large brow ridge, supraorbital torus, but the brain size is very small. So for males, it's about on average 560 cubic centimeters, and for females, 475 cubic centimeters. So even smaller than some of the Homo habilis specimens. And here we have a Homo naledi cranium. This one was recovered from a different chamber, which I'll go over shortly. And this is a Homo erectus specimen from Dmanisi. So you can see how similar they are morphologically. And both have small brain sizes. So yes, this Homo naledi specimen, the brain size is actually in the range of Homo erectus, but still really small. So if you remember, I think I covered this, some of the Homo erectus specimens, especially the earlier ones, were still quite small. But yes, this is one of the bigger ones. So overall, this species Homo naledi did have a small brain. But the Homo naledi endocast has similarities with other Homo species. So if you remember what an endocast is, it's basically the negative impression of the brain, it's a negative impression of the brain case. So you can kind of begin to get an idea of the morphology of the brain itself. So here we have a chimpanzee brain, a human brain. This one is an endocast of Australopithecus sediba, which is another specimen that Lee Berger described and published on, although I didn't cover this in this class. And here's Homo naledi. So I am not a neuroscientist whatsoever, but I will go over this in very general terms. So in chimpanzee here, you see you have this red colored Y thingamajiggy, similar to Australopithecus sediba. Whereas in humans, the red thingy is not a Y anymore. It's now a squiggly thingy, right? And then you have this green thingy-mabobber, which is most similar to Homo naledi, which has a red thingy here and a green thingy-mabobber here. I don't really know what any of this means, but basically it's to show you that, yes, Australopithecus sediba, which belongs in genus Australopithecus, right, more primitive than Homo, it's more similar to chimpanzee brain, whereas the Homo naledi brain is more similar to, say, a brain from our species. So even though Homo naledi had a small brain, morphologically, it looks very similar to a human. Okay, if we look at the mandible, teeth is smaller than Australopithecus, so exactly what you would expect from a Homo species, and a parabolic dental arcade. So again, a trait you would expect in a Homo species. You actually find articulated hands and feet. So if you remember when I talked about cima de los huesos, this is remarkable. You rarely get the finger and toe bones preserved because they're so small, they get destroyed, or they're crunched up by carnivores. But here we have fully articulated hands and most of the feet, basically illustrating how amazing this preservation is. And so what we can learn is that the hand is modern, but has curved phalanges, right? Which from previous lectures we know is usually indicative of some type of climbing. And the foot is modern as well, but also with slightly curved phalanges. So even though overall the hand and feet were pretty modern, they still had these primitive curved phalanges. Why is that? Open question. Okay, here's that picture again. We also know that Homo naledi has a cranially oriented shoulder joint, right? So very similar to Australopithecus, which is indicative of climbing. So between this trait and the curved phalanges, one might reasonably infer that Homo naledi did some climbing during its lifetime. And again, cranially oriented shoulder joint means the shoulder joint here, which connects to the arm, is oriented upwards towards the cranium. Homo naledi we know was about 90 to 121 pounds, so a bit on the lighter side, and stood 4.75 feet tall, so maybe on the shorter side. So small individual. The other chamber, which was explored and excavated more recently, is something called the Naledi chamber, so located here, just northeast of the naledi chamber. And you can see here again, it's a cave system, here's a cross section, and just how much you have to go underground to get to the actual hominin fossils themselves. Now, Naledi means light in the local language. Oh, I forgot to mention, the naledi chamber, that's how Homo naledi got its name. Naledi, naledi. Okay, so the Naledi chamber added 133 more fossils and at least 3 individuals and gave us this more complete cranium, so more complete than the Neo specimen. And this cranium is the one I actually showed when I compared it to the Dmanisi Homo erectus cranium. Or more precisely, this is actually a skull because the mandibles here as well. Okay, geological age. So based on everything I told you, how old do you think Homo naledi is? Of course, you can't answer, but maybe you'll think it's a bit older, right? Because it's so similar to Homo erectus. So maybe about 2 million years ago, 1.5 million years ago. Well, you would be wrong. Homo naledi is actually dated to 335 to 236,000 years ago. So much more recent than anyone expected. So finding a fossil specimen, a hominin specimen this young with those type of traits was very much a surprise to the entire paleoanthropological community. Other Homo naledi oddities, there are lots of individuals of various ages, so similar to cima de los huesos. There are no stone tools, so no Excalibur this time. No other animals except for rodents, which is super weird. There's no carnivore damage, no tooth marks, no chewing on the hominin bones. And it's hard to get into the chamber accidentally, as you could see with the Superman's crawl and all these other tight spaces that they had to climb through, basically in the dark. So how do you think Homo naledi got into this chamber? It's a huge puzzle, right? Well, what the researchers of Homo naledi think is that Homo naledi was burying its dead, right? Just like Lee said in that video. So this is, frankly, it's a hypothesis that's not really accepted by anyone else in the paleoanthropological community. But you can see this artist's reconstruction. You have some Homo naledi individuals basically taking a dead body and I guess throwing it into the chamber, which implies that there was an opening back then, which isn't open now. Now, why might this opening hypothesis be false? Well, if there was this opening, and there were all these dead, rotting bodies, you would expect there to be carnivores who were attracted to the smell and thus were also buried and found in the naledi chamber. You would expect other animals to have fallen in, and we don't see any of that. So there likely wasn't an opening back then. What that meant was, if this burial hypothesis is true, that Homo naledi, living individuals, were dragging this dead body behind them through the Superman's crawl, over the dragon's back, through these other narrow openings, which is just kind of insane to imagine, especially if it's underground and pitch black. That means they would have needed fire to light the way, so they would have had to wield a torch while dragging a dead body behind them. Not very feasible. So while the researchers pose this burial hypothesis, basically no other paleontologist accepts it, and it's still a taphonomic puzzle of why you have so many Homo naledi individuals there with no other animals, no carnivore damage. In fact, so much so that Kay Berensmeyer, if you remember that premier taphonomist I mentioned a while ago, she actually thinks her conclusion was that this must be a hoax. There's just no other way you get such a weird accumulation of bones in such a weird situation. So, maybe this is our new Piltdown, but maybe not. It's all an open question. Okay, phylogenetic hypotheses. Homo naledi has a very interesting morphology and is dated fairly young, right about 300,000 years ago. So where does it fit in our hominid family tree? Well, Lieberger and others have proposed that it could be here, right? The direct ancestor or leading directly to Homo sapiens. It could be here, that it was the ancestor of Homo erectus and later Homo, like Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. Or maybe here, where it's just the ancestor of all Homo, habilis, erectus, Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalensis. These were the three hypotheses he proposed. We basically have no idea. So how Homo naledi fits into our family tree is still an open question. Okay, so that concludes the 5th video, right? I introduced archaic Homo with a muddle in the middle problem. We defined it morphologically. We went over the specimens and sites from Europe, Africa, and Asia, and then went over some of the evolutionary hypotheses about whether it's one species or two species, how it arose, and when it arose to give rise to, or when did it give rise to Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens. Went over the behavior in archaeology, and we finished with Homo naledi.